Why is the car market so bad? If you're new to the channel, then you'll know that this is what we like to talk about, the ups and downs and trying to get a good deal as best as we possibly can. But clearly, since back in 2000, we saw a whole new shift in the market. Yes, the market changed permanently, pretty much. With obviously we have external sources, we have manufacturers in China bearing down and trying to bust down the doors of what's going on here in Canada, United States. Now, scale back, obviously with the demic that was going on in 2000, it changed everything. People sat at home, they had extra money, the governments were throwing money around like it was going out of style. And in many cases, people wanted new shiny toys, cars, trucks, boats, and even sports cars and things like that were often very, very popular. People would go out there, it was easy come, easy go with the money. And then that leveled off. All of a sudden we saw shortages. Well, there was chip shortages because there was a shortage of water, which resulted in a shortage of manufacturing chips, which then created a shortage in vehicles because we had this overabundance of vehicles that were 98% ready, but we couldn't put the modules and the electronics in them to ship them to market. This drove up a huge demand, and the demand absolutely went ballistic. But at that initial time, we saw interest rates were really low. So people were hurrying around. It was a buying frenzy. People wanted to get their hands on anything they possibly could. So what were they doing? They were buying up, snatching up everything. If you didn't want it, that person next to you would buy it. And so it created this real stressed, shortage. Of course, we had too much not enough inventory, too many customers, and certainly people were willing to pay a lot more than they probably should have. Fast forward a little bit, all of a sudden interest rates start to climb, but people didn't stop buying. The banks now started playing a role. Banks started facilitating these purchases. They wanted to keep the market going. Of course, interest rates start to climb. We saw inflation start to rise because people were buying. People were buying those toys and cars, trucks, houses. We've seen inflationary changes that we haven't seen in many, many years. But with this increased inflation, because all the excess buying that people were doing, it drove up interest rates because that's really what the government, that's their only lever. Whether you're in the US or Canada, the feds or the reserves are really adjusted only based on, the basis points. And if they want to control inflation, they try to hit you with a little bit higher inflationary changes. And that's controlled through interest rates, through the bank, through lending. Well, this was happening both Canada, US, and buyers were still buying. And you would think with the increased rates that people would stop buying, but they weren't. So this demand kept strong, kept building, kept going on. And the idea was to slow down that spending, but it really wasn't slowing down. And even if there were some people that could not afford a new vehicle, could not afford to buy, houses, cars, food for that matter, there was still enough people that could. And it kept the cycle going. There were still relative shortages with an excess amount of money. But was it money or was it available credit? See, that's what's been going on. And it's an unfortunate circumstance because the banks were a big, big part of this whole conundrum. Yes, we've never heard of 84 months, 96 months loan terms until the last couple of years. Because now what we saw were people willing to pay not just sticker anymore. I mean, back in the day, you would go in there and you'd sharpen your pencil, you'd negotiate. The dealer maybe was asking $30,000. You'd go in there and you try to carve out a deal, and maybe you'd walk out of there paying, $28,200 for that vehicle that was stickered at 30 grand. But now things were changing because of the shortage of vehicles, because of the urgency, and because of the high availability for money, whether it be from the government through handouts, or as we were transitioning to the banks to giving out these longer loan terms, people were willing to sign on the dotted lines, no muss, no fuss, and no negotiations. Buyers lost their brains, buyers lost their marbles, and buyers were willing to not just pay sticker price because of these shortages. People were paying over sticker. Have you ever heard of such ridiculous phrases like market adjustment fees? But that was happening. Market adjustment fees, where there is these perceived shortages in specific models that could command more dollars. There was a time when shortages just meant that they ran off the shelf a little quicker. But now these dealers were getting ultra greasy, and they were charging additional percentages, dollars, money over top of sticker, right at the dealer level. Now the manufacturers, we would set the price, albeit they were increasing their numbers every single year, year over year. But the dealers would absolutely say, look, you know, I've got this SUV, it might be a special edition. We know Corvettes were a big part of that. We know Broncos were a part of that. We saw BMWs participate. We certainly saw Cadillac participating. And a lot of brands were participating in this gouge fest. But people were still buying these products. So the dealers were looking at, well, if they can tolerate this, and it doesn't matter if we don't sell to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and they didn't care. Because there were still enough people willing to pay the top dollar, and over sticker in many cases. And the shortages kept going on, and of course the banks over on the side, hiding in the shadows, you know, the people with the biggest, shiniest buildings downtown are owned by the banks. And the banks were still facilitating these purchases. They didn't care on the back end that repossessions were coming in and delinquencies were rising, because they were giving a little extra, you know, a little extra buffer in there, a little extra forgiveness. They knew the writing was on the wall, but they, on the front end, the money and the inflationary rates that they were pumping up and selling at these new high revised bank rates, they were going to get way more than get that back. Now, unfortunately, people were starting to take on more debt. We're seeing more credit card debt, bank loans generally for whether it's, home line of equity. From your home, you're taking equity out of your home to buy a car or to buy, other things that you needed around the house. Maybe you need to put it on a new roof or renovations. The banks were lending money at record rates. But this was causing this continued extension, this overextending people. So we see more other issues. People just buying, people getting repossessed, repossessions rising. And it didn't matter. There were still new buyers walking in the door. And we saw then brands like Stellantis read the writing and saying, look, it doesn't matter if these vehicles aren't affordable anymore. Let's keep pushing our numbers up till we hit that breaking point, and then we'll back it off half a point. And that's kind of what they were trying to play. That was the game. And then during all that shortages, Stellantis, we saw Ram and Jeep were one of the few manufacturers where they were fattening up their lot supply. They were doubling down on production time and production schedules, trying to fill up lots and get ahead where everybody else was coming up short. They were betting and going for the long bomb that they were going to sell a lot of products while everybody else was blinking and sleeping behind the wheel. Pardon the pun. But that sort of backfired because people, there was a stable buying frenzy. I mean, it was still a frenzy, but there was there's stability in the market where we saw ups and downs, and all these other manufacturers were still somehow serving that market. Look at Toyota, build on demand. So you walk in there, you pay your $250 or $500 deposit, which was fully refundable, felt like a low risk. They were serving their customers, and they were still able to get most of their customers in the door. Most people who wanted a Toyota would wait around for 6 months, 4 months, and get their vehicle. So this was sort of backfiring on brands like Stellantis, which just kept fattening up their inventories, pushing their product out to the market. And then, lo and behold, they got to a point where they priced themselves out of the market. So you have these pockets of strangeness in the market where some cars are not selling at all, inventory's rising. Of course, we're seeing the electric vehicle market sort of level off. They were accelerating and now they've sort of tapered off. And the early adopters, they got their cars, they got their products, and while they'll be back trading in and trading up to the next model, the absolute new people, the new buyers potentially shopping around, looking and exploring the market, aren't as interested in electric vehicles. So now we're starting to see a leveling off in electric vehicle space. But why, you ask, are vehicle prices so high? Well, two main reasons. Number one, greed. We have the chicken tax taking hold. How could you ever imagine back in the day that a Ford, a Ram, GM, Stellantis, any of these products from the big three that would possibly command the kind of money? We showed all the time, $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 for a half-ton pickup truck. I've seen even showing $125,000 Canadian funds to get into a 1-ton loaded up diesel truck. That is absolutely bananas, but people are still buying, albeit they've slowed down. But again, these dealers are looking at it like the fleets are still busy, so businesses are still making money, and as long as businesses and fleet demand is up, the retail market is still somewhat volatile, and even though they're losing money year over year, not losing money, sales are down year over year, they're still selling enough retail products to get people in the door, to keep the money going, and of course the fleet side of the business is really keeping these people in business. But along comes the electric market. We know these manufacturers are struggling. Ford's struggling to sell the Lightning and the Mustang Mach-E, and they've had to highly incentivize. We've also seen GM. They've had some good recent months here, but that's only after pushing and highly incentivizing. Ram, they're looking at the writing and they're saying, we're going all EV. And that's interesting because that's counter to what the consumer's looking for. So now that the consumer's catching word, there's a lot of disruption in the Stellantis space. People are looking at that brand. They're going all electric. Their products aren't known for quality. They're overpriced. I'm good. Hence, Stellantis is in a world of hurt. Toyota's still holding their own. Brands like Honda are holding their own. Even with some of their recalls lately, people still trust the brand for the most part. Mitsubishi, Nissan, the Versa, Mitsubishi as well, have products that are relatively affordable in and around that $20,000 range. So they've had record sales. But outside of those brands, everybody else has been struggling. Brands like Mercedes, Volkswagen, Porsche, VAG Group, they're all struggling and they're not selling vehicles. Especially knowing that they have this EV mandate coming up very fast and furious. And what's been going on? Why are they struggling? And why are prices so high? Well, because these brands are having to fund the manufacturing of these EVs with the sales of their outgoing internal combustion vehicles. But in doing so, they're putting all of their eggs in that one basket. Their ICE products are not built of the same quality, in my personal opinion, and I've seen this. I've seen shortcuts, I've seen the lower grade materials, I've seen taking V8s and going 4 cylinders and put a cheap little hybrid attachment to it, i.e. Mercedes, and now they're starting to feel the burn. We're seeing brands like Mercedes literally tanking when about more than a third of their market share is sold in China. But China is now shifting to a much more cost-effective EV vehicle made by manufacturers by BYD. So BYD is trying to smash down the doors, trying to get in the North American market, trying to slither their way into Mexico first and push their way north. But all of this rhetoric and this discussion has all the big three in their protectionism based on the chicken tax, which was something that was derived many decades ago to protect the big three from foreign imports on the truck market. But guess what? BYD is manufacturing vehicles in the electric space, reading the writing on the wall, and all these manufacturers are going to be mandated to produce electric vehicles, very much a specialty of the Chinese electric market. The big three already have openly admitted they can't be competitive with the electric market, specifically when they're dealing with the competitors like from China. China's putting a lot of pressure on the system, and now we have all these manufacturers struggling to try to hurry up, fund, transition there into the electric vehicle space, but there's still limitations on batteries, limitations on the electric drive, and limitations on range and quality there, and they just can't break down. They're finding it difficult to produce a vehicle that's affordable for the masses, but yet competitive with the likes of Chinese. But in the Chinese market, we're seeing a lot of the European brands taking a nosedive. Volkswagen, talking about closing plants. They're struggling. The struggles are very real over there, and Volkswagen is risking some serious financial distress. They're looking at layoffs, maybe pay cuts, reducing staff, and they're trying to compensate by rejuvenating, grabbing $11 billion back just to get back on track because of the reduced amount of output they've had from their plants and the fact that they're looking at closures. Every single manufacturer, with the exception of possibly Toyota and Honda, are really in dire straits. And this is all because they've attached themselves so aggressively to the EV market space. And in doing so, they've had to increase prices on their core internal combustion vehicles. And in doing that, that means they have to charge more for everything. Okay, why have we exceeded inflation? Well, that's exactly for that reason. And that's why when a lot of us are scratching our heads and wondering, why do these car prices keep going up, especially when people can't afford it? Well, people like you and I can't afford it. And I would say largely the middle class is finding it more and more difficult to find a vehicle that's even targeted at the middle class, i.e. the F-150. Even they've had to create smaller vehicles like the Maverick. Even those are starting to slow down in sales, although that's kind of holding forward on their own. The fact remains is sales are slowing. And we're seeing year over year, full-size pickup trucks are slowly diminishing. But again, as long as sales are up on the EVs, which they are because they're highly incentivized, and specifically their sales on the hybrids are doing better than the full EVs, that's sort of keeping them on this teetering point. They're on that fine line, walking the path. Go too far EV and they're gone. Go too far ICE and they're not relevant. And so what we're looking at now is these manufacturers that are finding the best balance of producing a hybrid vehicle are the vehicles manufacturers that are likely going to find a better level of sustainability. But in doing that, you're paying more and getting less. You're getting a relatively well-equipped and well-defined and well-engineered hybrid system that doesn't cost a lot to produce, but you're paying a lot more money for it, i.e. the plug-in hybrid vehicles. You're paying as much as 20, 30, 40% more for the plug-in version of a regular hybrid system. I mean, lo and behold, you've got Toyota. Look at what Toyota's been doing. I mean, I went in and looked at a RAV4 hybrid and then a RAV4 hybrid, the Prime, which is the plug-in hybrid, and it's vastly more money. And it's actually a somewhat engineered and controlled shortage, in my personal opinion, to drive prices up on these plug-in hybrids. So the whole market is a mess. It's a race to the bottom. And the reason I say that is because every manufacturer is trying to fight for market share, trying to manufacture vehicles that are cheaper, more cost-effective in the EV space. But they know that China has got them all trumped. And once China walks into the back door, things are going to get really ugly. You're going to see a lot of manufacturers slamming doors, layoffs, firings, and just literally not being competitive. But in trying to find ways to manufacture EV vehicles, they're having to charge more for each one of their vehicles. The worst part is, there's so many buyers, even though a lot of us middle class, Lunchbox Joes for example, find it difficult to even afford anything these days because the cost of living is eating up all our buying power on trying to afford rent or house or mortgage. Food's eating us up alive, so there's nothing left for a $1,200 or $1,500 a month car payment, which is where we're at. So now you've got the banks getting involved, extending loan terms to drop that otherwise a $1,500 a month payment down to $800 a month payment by doubling down on their loan term. And as long as that happens, people keep buying. People keep buying, prices stay high, dealers see this artificially inflated market or this artificially funded market. People just get themselves deeper in hock. And of course, this ongoing funding to find cheaper manufacturing ways to create these EVs just means that you and I buying what's left of the internal combustion vehicles means that we are paying for that research and development for that new EV. Whether you bought that EV or not, you're supporting the EV program because that's what's happening. They're all developing the electric vehicles. And in doing that, you're all tripping over one another, trying to buy that next vehicle, and people are still paying sticker or above sticker. I was at a Toyota dealer the other day, and they asked me, what are you looking for? I wanted a 3-row SUV. I looked at a Highlander. I looked at a 4Runner, even though it's kind of pathetic. I like the 4Runner because I think the quality is there and it's built to last. The first thing out of the mouth of this salesperson was, well, yeah, 4Runners are hard to come by, and most people are paying, $5,000-$6,000 over a sticker. First thing I told him, hell no, I'm not paying $1 over a sticker, and I'll tell you what, I'll even try to negotiate off of sticker some more. And he kind of snickered and smirked, and I said, well, that's your last call, that's your last comment, and we won't be talking to you anytime soon, because it's the people that were willing to listen to this rhetoric and this nonsense and this hype that were willing to overpay. And it's those buyers that were willing to overpay have literally driven this market bananas. So you've got on one hand chicken tax protecting the big three. You've got on the other hand consumers funded and supported by banks to extend their loan terms and would walk into a dealer and pay whatever the dealers wanted. And the dealers were adding their 15, 20%, 30% markup every single year over a year. And it just never seemed to end. On the back end, the banks were somewhat satisfied, although they're kind of panicking because repossessions are on the rise. They're still getting paid for the most part. And repossessions are still only somewhere around that 6-7% right now on subprime buyers. So as long as they're getting 94% of their loan terms paid back in full, that looks like just a small cost of doing business, and they're still willing to fund even the higher risk buyers. As things get uglier, yes, they'll start to scale back and they'll look at you with more scrutiny and they'll say, no, we can't afford that. You're too high risk. You're a 500 credit score. No, we're not going to fund that. Go to some of those third-party lenders. But for the most part, there's too many lenders supporting the process. There's too many people willing to throw away their hard-earned dollars. And the bottom line is, you've got competition of people just willing to step over your hands. Even if you're willing to negotiate, the guy behind you isn't. So the dealer's going to gravitate to the lowest common denominator, or in this case, the highest common denominator. And so we're all fighting, trying to put, dig our heels in. But all it takes is 2 or 3 people willing to overpay, which is what's happening. And this vicious cycle keeps going on and on and on. So does this look to be getting any better? No. I mean, another complicated conversation into all of this. I know a lot of you have said, look, I just want a simple truck, wind-up windows. I don't need a sunroof or leather interior. Give me a good, reliable old V8 engine. And while there's a lot of people like you saying that, and I'm okay with that too, because for work trucks, that's all we need. But the sad reality, there was a poll hosted by one of our favorite journalists that said, look, they've done this assessment, they've polled a whole pile of people, and the general consensus is most people, to the tune of about 73% of the population, wants more technology. They want more of that tech in their vehicles. So as long as you've got 2/3 of the population screaming more tech, it's going to continue driving prices up. You want all your safety equipment, you want all your safety nannies and all your comfort nannies, and you want all of that equipment incorporated. That costs money. As you add more modules, more technicality, you have more engineering behind it, prices of these vehicles keep creeping up. You ask for it. Customers are asking for it, and they're delivering. When customers start pushing back and saying, look, we want bare bones, manual gearbox, crank windows, that's when these dealers and manufacturers and the OEMs will start to meet those demands. But till then, we are asking for it, they're delivering it. And that's another big reason these car prices are so bad and not changing anytime soon. Of course, these demands on the regulators to transition to EVs just have these conventional manufacturers trying to dig in deeper into their pocket, trying to fund this transition. Meantime, a lot of it's very much a sink or swim kind of environment where a lot of these manufacturers are literally either, going to get on board or they're just going to go underwater. We see what's going on with Volkswagen. This is real. This is ugly, and this is happening. So it's a very complicated conversation. There's a lot of moving parts, but unfortunately, the gap between haves and have-nots is growing. Those people that have, there's still enough of them to buy these vehicles, but the have-nots is growing. You and I might be more on the have-nots these days. And as long as they've got the haves stepping up and buying the inventory that's created, it seems to meet the demand. That's the bottom line. Why are things so bad? That's why they're so bad. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Definitely check out that video. I get into more detail about this whole complicated conversation, and I hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. See you real soon. Bye-bye.